Dr. Khalid, just go ahead and give us a little bit of your background on, you and I knew each other growing up, and we go back to elementary school, which is
Yeah.
an absolute blessing because you and I are both in our 50s now. So, the fact that we stay connected is a beautiful thing. But let's go back to how we met, and which starts in Detroit, Michigan, in Northwest Detroit on 7 Mile in the Lodge in that area. And there's an elementary school called Werner Elementary, which is in the northwest side of Detroit between 7 and 8 Mile. Uh, just to go into a little bit of background on your memory of me and how we met, and your memories growing up in that particular neighborhood and what led you to Werner Elementary School. So if you can just kind of give us a little bit of your background on that, that'll be a nice little starter for us. So go ahead.
All right. So it's we're talking wow, 40, 50, well, about 40, 45 years or so, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I thought about this a few times, like where did we cross paths in the beginning? Because you're a year above me, and I think that we met through Kevin Jones,
Mm-hmm.
who was my neighbor on Snowden Street in Detroit, Northwest Detroit.
Yep.
But my memories of Werner, man, are very rich. We had some great teachers. Our teachers in the early 70s were very much informed by the civil rights movement, the Black Power era. So when I think about teachers who impacted me at Werner, I think of obviously Mr. Shelton, who was the first Black male teacher I ever had. He had a big afro, salt and pepper afro.
Yep.
Was very much a disciplinarian.
Are you gonna talk about that paddle with the
And,
electrical tape on the end?
absolutely. I mean, that was the original board of education.
The Board of Education.
That was the original act right. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, he was just. I mean, and he's the person that was always that image of a Black male teacher that I had. He always came to class with a tie on. Always just represent what a Black male teacher should look like. So when I became a teacher, I remember when I first got my first assignment, I went back to Werner and told him to share with him that I just became a teacher, and he was so proud. But so Mr. Shelton was a huge influence on me, left a huge impression. Mrs. Hunter, who
Oh
also
my
had a
God.
huge afro.
Yes.
So
Mathematics.
yeah, so another math teacher, right?
Yep.
So she had a big influence on me as well. When I think about Black teachers in elementary school, and then Mrs. Robinson also had an afro.
Oh yes,
Yeah, and
yes.
she was the music teacher,
Music,
and
yeah.
taught about everything from Negro spirituals to classical Western composers. I remember reading about Hans Christian Andersen, in their class. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember those names from elementary school. But we also know, but that's also a place where I learned the Negro national anthem. Or now we call it the Black national anthem.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, she was a phenomenal teacher, man. So elementary school having Black teachers had a huge impact on me.
But
Early on.
Dr.
But
Khalid,
yeah,
let me tell you this. In other forums, I've seen in social media, people ask, what grade were you in when you had your first Black male teacher? And you and I can fortunately say elementary school.
yeah,
But I've heard a lot of people say
never.
it took them a long time, if ever they had a Black male teacher. So that's the first thing I want to just acknowledge and appreciate, that you and I were blessed to have that growing up in Detroit, in the Northwest Detroit, in the neighborhood that we grew up in.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And even with that being said, just the blessing of growing up in the city of Detroit in the 70s, post civil rights era. But Detroit was one of great ground zero of the struggle. You know what I'm saying? And we have a legacy of many radical organizations in Detroit, and radical thinkers in Detroit, revolutionaries in Detroit, and we benefited from that as kids growing up in the 70s. And so, like I often say, we were blessed in the 70s growing up, being born in that era. If I could say that we grew up in a Wakanda-like city, simply because we always saw a black mayor, a black city council, a black superintendent, a black board of education, black chief of police, black police commissioners and all that, black clergy, black entrepreneurs who were millionaires. We saw them on TV. Detroit was one of the first cities with a black TV station, 100% owned. So
Yeah.
we had a very different experience that I've come to learn from some of my counterparts across the country, and that had an impact on us. And on top of having a black teacher or black teachers in elementary school through high school, was a huge impact. But getting back to just growing up in Northwest Detroit, growing up on Snowden Street was very interesting because we still had some remnants of white families that didn't leave. On my block, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 white families, and 2 of those families were mixed, were husband and wife, husbands who were black, wives who were white on our block, which was real interesting. But we also had Mr. Little, who lived on our block as well, who was Malcolm's oldest brother. Wilfred Little lived 5 houses down from me.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he lived 5 houses down from me, and growing up on that block with him, it was very interesting because Malcolm X was not someone that people celebrated at that time. So it took from the time that I was, conscious of Mr. Little, which was probably elementary school, like, hey, Mr. Little, to after 1991 when Spike Lee released Malcolm X, for us to know who he was, because
Wow.
he was a quiet man, he and his wife, and he never told at least the youth who he was. And I think the adults knew who he was, but Malcolm was not celebrated. So, it wasn't until the mid 80s when KRS-One released By All Means Necessary, where Malcolm X even got on our radar in a real type of way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So it was hip hop that resurrected, at least in my humble opinion, resurrected Malcolm X's legacy to the point that people were even interested, at least in my generation, about Malcolm X, and saw him in a different context than my parents saw him, which was Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Martin Luther King good, Malcolm X questionable, at best. So it wasn't like my parents were saying, yo, you need to go down the street and sit at the feet of Mr. Little because he has something to teach you. That wasn't happening. Nor was it happening. I don't know if Kevin Jones's family sent him over there, and I don't think they did. Nor one of our other good friends, Carl Stubbs. I don't think his parents were sending him down to sit at his feet. But we came to really appreciate him, when the movie came out, or when we found out that Spike Lee was coming on the block to interview him. Like, why is Spike Lee down at Mr. Little's house interviewing?
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And like, who is he? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but then we realized, this deep history of our neighbor.
Wow.
So, you talk
I did
about,
not know that, man. That is
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So you talk about history being right under your nose and you not understanding what that history is. I mean, bro, I think about often how many missed opportunities I had to sit at his feet.
Right.
But once I graduated from school and became a teacher, he did give me time, and he came and spoke to my classes a couple times when I taught at the Detroit Job Corps. But yeah, it was just like wow, like kind of missed that opportunity with him. But
That is that is
he
beautiful.
was a beautiful man, and the thing is when you ask him questions, he would tell you all that you wanted to know. But
Hmm.
if you didn't ask, he wasn't going to tell you. You know what I'm saying? It just
Hmm.
wasn't those types. It wasn't one of those types of things, man. So um, and he ended up donating a couple things to the museum as well, which was a blessing. But yeah, but growing up on that block, man, was amazing. It was a it was a I guess it was a quote unquote integrated block. Um, very much middle class values,
Hmm.
conservative to a point.
Hmm.
Um, you know, people watched out for us for the kids on the block. We were we were allowed to at least hang out wherever we wanted to hang out on the block. And and the parents watched us and
As soon
made
as
sure
that
that
street light came on,
absolutely. So
you
as
had to
soon as
come
we came,
home.
you had to come home, but or come home or make sure that you are on somebody's porch. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
And but yeah, we had a tight knit group of young people on our block. The other interesting thing too, on which we don't see a lot in these days, is that all of us we went to 3 schools in our career. We went to the same elementary, same middle school, and the same high school. So
Hmm.
those relationships that we had with the kids in the neighborhood lasted a lifetime. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't surprising that you and I reconnected because of our similar background, because of that experience. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. So kind of take me a little bit beyond elementary school. So yeah, you just mentioned we all went to Beaubien Middle School,
right,
and for me at Beaubien, my memory of Verner Elementary, in addition to the teachers that you already mentioned, um, I remember art class. I remember music. I remember, of course, as professionally, I ended up getting a degree in engineering. So math was a big thing. So Miss Hunter and Mr. Shelton were big, and I remember Miss Hunter, her husband, Freddie Hunter, um, I remember him taking us bowling, and he would have us take score from bowling because right now when you go bowling, the computer keeps all the
right,
score. But
right,
but back in the day when we grew up in the 70s, you had to do that manually. So that was a way for us to learn math by taking score of us bowling. So those are some things that I just remember our math teacher's husband taking us bowling.
right,
And we learned math through keeping each other's score on bowling, which gets a little bit tricky when you get a spare and you get 2 strikes in a row. It's a little bit tricky. The math changes a little bit,
exactly, yeah,
and it was just a beautiful. I remember that growing up, that a lot of people don't get to this day because computers take all the score. So then you go to Beaubien Middle School, and you know we that was when I really got into science. But and I know you went to Mumford High School, which is legendary in Detroit. If you watch the Eddie Murphy movie, what was it? What was
Beverly
that
Hills
movie?
Cop, Beverly
Yeah,
Hills Cop,
Beverly Hills Cop, Mumford High School. And I went to Cass Tech downtown Detroit. But yeah, no, the middle school, Beaubien Middle School. I mean, man, that's where I really got into science.
mm-hmm.
And we had a science teacher who and I, we had science fairs in Detroit, Metro Detroit Science Fair, and I got a gold medal for a science fair project, which got a trip to Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you got that trip too, or at least
I did. It might not have been the same year,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, but I did get that trip.
I mean, I remember getting on a train, winning a gold medal for a science fair project, and getting on a train. Number one, having a black male teacher,
Mm-hmm.
science teacher in middle school, another thing. But getting on a train to go to Toronto, which had a real nice science museum.
Right.
But you got a gold medal for a science fair, the Metropolitan Detroit Science Fair. You got a gold medal, and you got a trip to Toronto. I mean, you know, we're kids going on a trip to Toronto. We ain't been nowhere. Maybe
Right.
Cedar Point or something, but you know. And then you know, we're talking to girls on the train, and you know, I mean, it was just. I just remember that like it was yesterday. You and I, we were in our 50s, and we're talking about stuff that happened in the early to mid 70s, like it was yesterday.
Yeah. So Mr. White was the teacher I had
Terry
who
White. Yep, me
yeah,
too.
who put me into the DepSep program, which we eventually participated in the science fair.
And let me just DAPSEP, Detroit Area Pre-College Engineering Program, DAPSEP. So go ahead.
Thank you, because I couldn't remember that.
We're gonna have
But
a
thank you.
global audience, so I want
Yeah,
everybody to understand.
thank you. I appreciate that. So it's funny because I did not get a gold medal. I got an honorable mention.
Mm-hmm.
And so my best friend at the time, Freeland Gwynn, you might know Freeland Gwynn. He went to
Yeah,
Cat.
yeah.
All right. So this is funny. So Freeland, we were in class, and Freeland, he did something in class that pissed off Mr. White. And so based upon that, he ended up snatching that opportunity away from Freeland and giving it to me. And Freeland's hated me since then. But you know, Freeland and I are still best friends. But yeah, he he ended up giving me that trip. But I got an opportunity to go to Toronto, and I have a photograph of me and Silvery Benson. You remember Silvery
I remember the
Benson?
name.
So Silvery is one of Detroit's hip hop pioneers. All
Mm.
right. So there are only a handful of MCs, female MCs, who were like doing it on a in terms of Detroit on a big level.
Mm-hmm.
And she was one of them. But she was also a childhood friend too. So she lived on Ward. I lived on Snowden, and her sister and my sister were best friends. But Silver and I were always in class together, growing up. So, but me and Silvery went, and along with a bunch of other people. But my memory of that trip was great. So the museum, the Science Museum in Toronto, was just off the chain. But we also went to whatever the amusement park is there. I forgot the name of it. It'll come to me in a minute. But we also went to the big amusement park, wherever the equivalent to Six Flags is in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have family in Toronto too. So I ended up staying with my family extended, while I was there. When everybody went back, I ended up staying with my family there. But
Okay.
that was a great trip, a great experience. And it was also through Mr. White's class too that I had the opportunity to go to a weekend retreat. It wasn't a weekend; it was a week long experience at the University of Michigan. It was a summer engineering program that I was a part of, and so
Was that
that
through DAPSEP or just through his class?
I think it was through DAPSEP. I'm pretty sure it was,
Okay. Because I
but
know I had a 1 week class, summer class at University of Michigan through DAPSEP. But the biggest thing for me was a 6 week summer program at Michigan State through
okay,
DAPSEP.
yeah,
And that program, and that was, I was in high school at the time.
right,
And in that program, I mean, I remember, we're talking a long time ago, like 1985 or so, when I did this. But I remember this like it was yesterday. It was 6 weeks on the campus of Michigan State University. And I was in probably the 10th or 11th grade, or the summer in between 10th and 11th grade at the time. And we spent a lot of time going into advanced mathematics.
mm-hmm.
Morning class was about that. In the afternoon, we would go on a field trip and talk to engineers, people who were doing engineering, and we would sort of take a tour of their environment, their plant, their organization, and learn what they do. And
Right,
then in the evening, we would be forced to study engineering concepts and mathematics and stuff like that. and we're 10th and 11th graders, and it was, you know, some pretty girls there from Cass and Renaissance, smart girls. So, you know,
Right.
we're guys. I mean, you know, there's that
Right.
dynamic as well. So, you know, you kind of had to try to control that, but that at least gave me exposure to, hey, you know, this is what engineering is about. So when I did get to college, I
Mm-hmm.
had already had a little bit of background and training to help advance me in the career or the field of studying what it need to take to get through a curriculum of engineering. So,
Oh
but
yeah.
no, that was a beautiful thing, getting that as early as middle school to get us that motivation to do that kind of stuff later. So I mean that, you know, we can't discount the beauty of that and the
Oh,
influence
absolutely.
that that had.
So yeah, so that reminds me of a couple things. One is the vocational in vocational science in business pathways that Bobian provided.
Hmm.
So it was as a student at Bobian is where I first learned how to type, which is
Mm.
a invaluable skill that people don't think about. But I remember as recently as just a couple years ago when I was working on my PhD, some of my colleagues had never learned to type. And you imagine, if you can't imagine writing through a dissertation and you can't type versus someone who can type,
Right.
man, I thank the creator that I was able to pick up that skill in middle school. And we learned how to type on typewriters, you know what I'm saying? So,
Yep, I remember
types, push the lever. Um,
the
but
home keys.
home keys, yeah. So we had Mr. Krajewski back in
Uh-huh.
back in Bobian for our teaching teacher. I mean our typing teacher. And
Mhm.
so, with black students, where we grow up, everything's a competition. So we ended up competing every day in typing against each other, man. And so it raised our skill level up where we were focused on. I remember we just focused on accuracy and speed. You know what I'm saying? And just like in hip hop, where people battle back and forth,
Yep.
you battle back and forth long enough that your skill level just raises.
Yep.
So when we left his class, I mean, everybody was typing on on the skill level was just high.
Yep.
But that's a skill set that I carried throughout my life. But also being in that class or being in Bobian, being introduced to even the concept of going to college, because that wasn't in the household. That's a desire, but it's not until you get that exposure and you go away for a few days. We're on the campus of U of M Ann Arbor for I think a week, and just met people from all around the city of Detroit, seeing young black kids who were wanting the same thing, right? And then and creating relationships that I still have a relationship with a couple of people from that program. But we coming back, I think one of the challenges is that there was not a strong follow-up. So it's like, all right, yeah, I do want to go to college, but no one's telling me, well, these are the classes that you need to take. This is when you're supposed to, these are the deadlines that you have to hit. These are the scholarships that you should be focused in on, that type of thing. So when I transitioned from Bobian to Mumford, it's a different type of situation. Getting settled into the high school situation. Although I did have supportive teachers and I had a great counselor um, who was a great mentor. It wasn't until late in my high school career that I really solidified that relationship. But also it was in high school that I was introduced to some mentors who are police officers, where I first got a strong interest in law enforcement. So that was actually my career trajectory was law enforcement.
Hmm.
So I think that people probably thought that I was okay because I was participating in that, which was a great program. I was a part of the 12th Street Police 12th Precinct Police Explorer program, which I ended up elevating in that program and taking on leadership positions and building um, just leadership skills and just getting a sense of community service and just being mentored by some great people. Officer Donald Kirkwood was a very great mentor to me, as well as Kathy Warren, who's still a great friend, family friend, and mentor to this day. So,
So
but yeah,
for people to understand, Mumford High School is sort of the neighborhood high school in Northwest Detroit, and which is where you went to. I went to Cass Technical High School, which, for people who don't understand or know, you have to apply to get into Cass Tech. And Cass Tech is a very specialized school. It's downtown Detroit. So I had to take a bus to get to Cass Tech. But and just as a point of reference, my graduating class in 1987 at Cass Tech was 770 students, of which 90% went to college. Okay, and Cass Tech was 99% Black. And
mm,
so, downtown Detroit, it was just a beautiful thing. But yes, I was sort of nurtured, and me and my classmates were nurtured to go to college. And at Cass Tech, I took classes in put it this way, my senior year at Cass Tech, 12th grade, I took a year of calculus, okay, in high school. I took a physics class, a third level physics class, which was calculus based. Okay. And I took a 2-hour organic chemistry lecture and laboratory class. So that was the type of education that I had at Cass Tech. Whereas Mumford, which was more of a neighborhood school, which is where you went to, you don't necessarily have those type of statistics, but
right.
you still had at least that nurturing and that like you said, that vocational aspect, which sort of pushed you more towards maybe some trades. And obviously there are some folks who went to college, and that you had that, that diversity of
Well,
outcomes.
yeah. So and so the key is that there was choice. So
Yeah.
you had the vocation, but you also had the business track. So as a student, I was in the business track. I was in the business co-op program. So in my junior and senior year, I was going to school half the day. The second half of the day, I was doing some type of business work in the community. But I did have some phenomenal Afrocentric mentors at Mumford as well. So one of the standout teachers that I had was Shoshana Shakur. Her name was Miss Hill back then, but Miss Shakur um, is a sister of Chokwe Lumumba,
Wow.
he was a part of the Republic of New Africa. He was Afro-centered, African-centered lawyer. He was Tupac Shakur's lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
He eventually became the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. But just one of our great freedom fighters. You know what I'm saying? So,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember her teaching us about her brother back then, and given that exposure back then, you knew it was important because it was important to her, but not knowing exactly all the context around that. And so, as many years later, when I started hearing his name again through my studies and seeing him, in court with Tupac and that time, I'm thinking back to high school, like, oh, that's her brother. That's who she was telling us about. And, I didn't get it then, but definitely got it later on in life. But yeah, so she was a teacher, one of my great teachers. Who else? Dr. Duke, who,
Mm-hmm.
who was our marketing teacher. So again, being in business and having him as a teacher and teaching us marketing at a very, very early age, man, was phenomenal. And then I had an accounting teacher. I can't remember his name right now, but this accounting teacher taught us not only just general accounting skills, but he was big on the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
And every day he would bring us everybody a newspaper, and he would teach us about stocks. And
In high school
in high school, and
at Mumford.
he,
Wow.
he taught us stock, how to read the stocks and everything, and how to follow the stocks, all of that. Unfortunately, I didn't keep that skill set, but I appreciate it now, you
Yeah.
know. But and not only that, he taught us how to do taxes, which we were able to do our parents' taxes and friends' taxes as high schoolers. So
Wow.
that's a skill set that we got, and and so in terms of practical life skills, I mean, we got it, there, and we had teachers who cared and teachers who wanted to make sure that we got those certain skill sets. Um, but getting back to the just the process of like trying to get to college, like I knew in my mind as a freshman, coming off my experience as going to U of M, I wanted to go to U of M. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember telling people I wanted to go to U of M or go to an Ivy League school because I'm thinking these are the best schools, so I wanted to go there. But saying that and finding people who were going to get me, to that point,
Right.
I was lost. You know what I'm saying? I was just lost. I was saying it, but I didn't have anybody like working to get me there, telling me what classes I needed to take, and that type of thing. But again, on the opposite end, I think people saw something in me in terms of just leadership and passion for community. That's that involvement in the Police Explorers. I think people thought I was just going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was. I mean, and I was. But
Mm-hmm.
when it came down to like me applying for colleges that I really wanted to get into, that's when the reality hit that, all right, well, you don't have the grades, you don't have the courses, you know what I'm saying, to
Yeah.
get into those schools. But I ended up getting accepted into Central Michigan University, and also got accepted into Ferris State University. And I
Mm-hmm.
decided to go to Ferris State, and I got accepted into the criminal justice program. So that's
Okay.
where my college started.
Okay, so I only applied after graduating from Cass, or at least in my senior year. I only applied to two schools,
Mm.
University of Michigan and Morehouse. And at the time, uh, one of my best friends, who was a year ahead of me, he had just finished his first semester at Morehouse and was home for Christmas break. And he called me and was like, "Bruh, you got to come to Morehouse. You got to come to the house." And I remember that phone conversation like it was yesterday. This was, basically in 1986, in Christmas, around Christmas of 86. And I was in my senior year when I graduated in 87. And, and basically I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to Morehouse. So I only applied to Michigan and Morehouse. And so yeah, that's kind of where I ended up going. And and I ended up studying physics. You study criminal justice. I study physics.
Early on criminal justice, but that changed quickly.
Well, yeah. So I ended up studying physics and engineering at Morehouse. So kind of fast forward to coming to the knowledge of self, and then you kind of changing your government name to your current name. Talk about that process. When did you kind of come into that whole knowledge of self? For me, it was freshman year at Morehouse. But
Yeah.
what was that for you?
So that process I take back to 87, 88,
Mm-hmm.
and I center it in hip hop culture. I
Mm-hmm.
center it in listening to "You Must Learn My Philosophy" by Boogie Down Productions.
Oh my God,
Um,
that song
it,
was so
yeah,
powerful.
yeah. I reflect upon the whole album. It Takes a Nation of Millions. Fear of a Black Planet later on. So for me, it was through a hip hop lens, right? And it didn't, and all this knowledge itself didn't happen overnight, but it was ongoing, parallel with me just, being a new student outside of my parents' house, up in Big Rapids, Michigan, and and all the things that come along with you being away from home for the first time, and you be exposed to a whole bunch of things that you've never been exposed to before, and you partying and whatever, right? As
Yeah.
students, but yeah, but I ended up meeting some Saudi students, some Saudi national students, and I remember when Malcolm X came out and how popular Malcolm was. And so the students who I was meeting from overseas, they were excited because they were able to connect with us via Malcolm X, because they're like, well, we're Muslims, and here's this guy Malcolm X, and he went to Mecca. We know Mecca because we've been to Mecca, because of their cultural background and where
Mhm.
they were from. So we were having, we had some deep conversations about Malcolm, and they were interested about in who he was prior to him going to Mecca, and I was interested in just his whole life, and because he was at one point Detroit Red, we had that connection as well. But it was through hip hop that I first got interested in reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. I didn't read it in high school or middle school, even though we had black teachers. It just wasn't, on our list to read, and we definitely weren't reading about him at Ferris State University through any of those classes.
Mhm.
But but I remember 18 years old, I picked up the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I think that very well could have been the first book that I've ever read in my life, cover to cover, just for my own benefit.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah.
That's that's
So
that's significant.
yeah.
That's
So
significant.
that dropped a lot of knowledge in me, and it just gave me a deep sense of self, man. And so I was exposed to Islam through that experience. Um, and then over the course of a few years, I researched a lot of different religions. I mean, I grew up in a Christian household. My parents were divorced when I was 5. My
Mhm.
father ended up converting to Judaism. So a part of my childhood experience was going to visit him on some weekends and him taking me to a synagogue. And I remember very vividly that the synagogue that he went to at the time was right in the middle of Palmer Park. I think eventually it became the Unity Center, became a Christian a Christian institution, but at the time it was a synagogue. So that was so going experiencing the high holidays of Judaism and that type of thing. Um, was a part of my lived experience too. So the idea that a black man could convert to a new religion was not
Foreign to you,
yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't foreign to me at all. And that you can change your name, which my father did, that wasn't foreign to me at all. So, but going back to college, getting back to college, just that experience of debating and sharing and seeking knowledge. Even with listening to Public Enemy and the samples of Minister Farrakhan and Ava Muhammad and Khalid Muhammad, listening to that and researching and understanding that there was an alternative to the white Christian ideas that I was exposed to, and me
Mhm.
starting to starting to challenge those things, had just had a big impact on how I viewed the world. And so eventually in 1994, I took my Shahada at Ferris right before I graduated. And I became a Muslim then. And
Okay.
yeah, I started practicing then. And when I left Ferris, I came to Detroit. I started teaching at the Detroit Job Corps,
Mhm.
and I taught there for a couple of years, and then got offered a position in the Detroit Public Schools, and started teaching there. And I taught there from 1997 to 2011.
Okay, awesome. And so my coming into the knowledge of self really happened at literally freshman year at Morehouse. See, your experience kind of came outside of the classroom. Obviously, you didn't
Right,
get it it happened at Ferris, but it
right,
happened through hip hop culture. You know,
right.
I got it in the classroom at Morehouse freshman year we had a class called Introduction to African Civilizations, which was required for freshmen at Morehouse. And it went into the African origins of humanity and civilization. And, so between that and all the people who would come and lecture at Morehouse or at Spelman, which included like Minister Tynetta Muhammad, who was married to Elijah Muhammad, okay, came and spoke at Spelman. And I remember her lecture sitting there like, oh my God, she was awesome. And then you talk Khalid Muhammad, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, John Henrik Clark, Francis Quest Welsing, Leonard Jeffries. All of these folks came to Morehouse and gave lectures. And I'm sitting here like, wow. And I remember Khalid Muhammad, man, that brother brought the house down.
We did.
And I didn't know none of this stuff.
Right.
And I'm sitting here like, oh my God. And so that whole knowledge of self just really, really happened for me, fortunately, at Morehouse. And then you talk about the hip hop influence, KRS-One. He came and gave a lecture, did not rap at all, just spoke knowledge, dropped knowledge. And I'm like ready for him to do some boogie down production stuff. Brother just gave a lecture and broke down everything. And I'm sitting here like, so yeah, I mean, that once you get that knowledge of self, I mean, there's no going back.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a
So
beautiful thing.
yeah, so one of the interesting things about Ferris, and I remember being in high school, I had a classmate who I remember we were sitting in the back of a class, and we were just talking about the colleges that we were going to, and he told me about Ferris, and I remember us having a conversation. I got accepted to Ferris and to Central, like I said. He got accepted to Ferris, and we both, and he was more familiar with Ferris than I was, but he told me, I remember him telling me, he's like, yeah, man, it's kind of like an HBCU. I'm like, for real? He's like, yeah, it's a bunch of black students up there. And so I realized, once I got there, it definitely wasn't an HBCU. However, the I think it was about 1,000 students, 1,000 black students up there at the time. Mm-hmm. And because of the bond that we had, it very much was that experience of like being amongst your people. So when you have a tight-knit group like that, the experience, the bonding, and the use of university resources, where we were able to use those effectively, where we had, KRS-One come to campus, Chuck D, Dr. Ben, Rasul Muhammad, who's Tynetta's son.
Rasul, yes, sir. Yeah, Minister of Mosque #1 in Detroit.
Yeah. So Minister Rasul was the first minister in the Nation of Islam I ever saw speak.
Wow.
And so
that brother is so charismatic, man.
Oh, absolutely. So that brother touched my soul, you know what I'm saying? And then was also reinforced the things I had been learning about Malcolm. And again, all of this stuff is a process, and still, trying to balance being a student and all these other things. So it wasn't like, oh, you get knowledge of self and all of a sudden you're this, I'm this righteous individual walking around campus, whatever. It definitely was not. That was not it. But you're grappling with all of these things, peer pressure and all those types of things. But once all the smoke cleared, it was like, all right, you have this foundation, and you realize that, all right, well, with this knowledge that you have, with this foundation you have to make a contribution to your community. Like that's what you're tasked with at this time. You've been given this incredible privilege of going to college. You've been exposed to a deep science and knowledge and history via all of these different incredible intellectuals. So the question becomes, what do you do with this?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And but I'm glad you mentioned that about Ferris. And there, you can say the same thing about a lot of those other local universities here in Michigan, where a lot of Black students from Detroit area or Pontiac or Grand Rapids would go to, because when you said 1,000 students at Ferris, black students. Morehouse, my freshman class was about 700 or so students, right? But when you combine that with Spelman, you got another 700 females as well. So it's a wonderful mixture there, because we also had Clark and Morris Brown as well in that same area within a couple blocks of each other. But Morehouse it was just basically about 2,000 students or so. Okay, total, freshmen all the way to seniors, right? And so so you're talking about 2,000 or so students on a campus. All right. So you kind of talk about, Ferris is not really an HBCU, but when I'm at a HBCU and we're talking about 2,000 students. So when you talk about that type of size, it's a good perspective to kind of compare your experience with my experience. Fortunately for me, most of my professors at Morehouse were Black. And all of us, my fellow students, were Black. And so we were just basically blackety black in terms of, every class that we had, whether it be religion, world literature, music, philosophy, psychology, everything was basically Black. In terms of the students and the professors and the context of the subject matter, which is a beautiful thing between HBCU versus like where you went. But at the same time, we're talking about number of students. Hey, you get that experience, either way. It's a beautiful thing.
I had 2 Black teachers at Ferris. No, 3. I'm sorry, 3. I had 3 Black teachers at Ferris. 3 Black male teachers at Ferris. So it makes a difference. But I think one thing that we have to point out, which we haven't yet, is the influence of A Different World.
Oh my God.
School Days.
Oh my God. 1988.
And the Cosby Show.
Yes.
Because I think popular media at that time informed us on a very deep way in terms of looking at how we're going to look at going to college, how to experience college. And it just reinforced a lot. It's very interesting right now to see in America folks that came from that generation, the positions of power that they have right now in government.
Yep.
Right.
Well, I think I told you the new senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock.
Yes.
That's my classmate from Morehouse.
Yes.
Fresh fall of 1987, Reverend Warnock was in W.B. Du Bois Hall, right across the yard from where I was living, Howard Thurman Hall.
Right.
Fall of 1987, Morehouse College. Bruh, he is now Senator Raphael Warnock. But in the fall of 87, man, that was just a brother from Savannah, Georgia, man,
Exactly.
And I mean, that's the beauty of it all. Because the brothers that, when I remember in the Martin Luther King Chapel, of course, Martin Luther King is our greatest alumni at Morehouse. So the chapel on campus is named after Martin Luther King. And that's where the lecture from Dr. Ben and Khalid Muhammad was there. Ashwa Kwesi did his slide presentation about the African origins of civilization and religion. Dr. Ben was there, John Henrik Clark, Khalid Muhammad. And that night we went into the dorm because they kicked us out. They can go all night. Right. And at some point security had to kick us out of the chapel. And we just carried over the debate. And Kwame Ture came.
Oh my God.
I mean, bruh, this was the epicenter of Blackness, right? And we would go into these debates all night. And the brothers that we will be debating with are pastors now of big churches and businesses. Morehouse is the #1 feeder school to Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School.
Right.
But then also you got your Jamal Bryants and Otis Mosses. I remember they were preaching, and Raphael Warnock, they were preaching at Morehouse as teenagers.
Wow.
And so the network and the think tank was just beautiful. And don't get me started with Spelman. Stacey Abrams,
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
don't get me started with Spelman, right across the street. But we just talking about brothers right now. I mean, I just cannot tangibly describe that the beauty of that experience and what that was for me. But we can go all night, man. Let's you talked about the main thing, and that is having that knowledge is one thing. What do you do with it? So
Exactly.
so let's just talk a little bit about how you became, uh not only Khalid, but Dr. Khalid.
Yeah.
And once you got that knowledge yourself, and I got that knowledge yourself, but this is about you, not me. What did you do with that, and what the contributions that you made to the culture and the community? Let's
Yeah.
talk about that now.
So three things parallel are happening at Ferris. One is that I'm on the student programming board at Ferris State. So we're responsible for bringing all the talent, speakers, comedians, groups to Ferris. So quickly, some of the people that we're bringing at that time, we bought Bill Cosby to campus. We bought Chuck D, KRS-One, a very young Joe Rogan, who Joe Rogan is, Margaret Cho, um, De La Soul, the Lynch Mob, X Clan, and so on and so forth. So we're bringing people to campus, but in that process, I'm learning how to negotiate contracts. So it's something that I ended up falling in love with in terms of just business. I like being in that field, um, but also I connected with a brother who was a poet, and we formed a group called Third Stone from the Sun, which is the name that we took from Jimi Hendrix. But we were kind of imitating the last poets. Well, there's no question we were imitating the last poets and Gil Scott Heron, who we were introduced to their work. Long story short, we were introduced to the last poets. I ended up developing a strong relationship with the brothers, but particularly Umar bin Hassan, who I ended up having a deep relationship with, friendship with, that lasts till today. But I started doing bookings for the last poets. So as I recently graduated, I started working and developed my own entertainment company, mainly booking shows for the last poets. Um,
Wow,
so in this is, I know I'm 24, 25 at the time.
that is so
Uh,
dope.
yeah, and through that relationship, I ended up meeting this young cat hip hop artist in Detroit by the name of Proof.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the particular night that I met him. We were hanging down at a place called the Mediterranean Cafe, which was the spot
Oh
that
yes, sir.
everybody from St. Andrews on Friday nights and
Yes,
Saturday nights
sir.
to the Mediterranean. It was a 24-hour joint. So all the artists, hip hop artists, techno artists, whoever, that's where everybody would go after hours, right? 2 o'clock in the morning, that's when people hung out. So this particular night, I'm promoting a show that I'm doing for the last poets. They were going to be performing at Alvin's. And I ran into this long haired, dreadlock cat, Proof. I was familiar with him because he worked at the hip hop shop. But I didn't have a relationship with him. So I gave him a last poets flyer. He looked at it, he's like, oh, this is dope. And he gave me a flyer of his group Five Ella. And he got a sense of my vibe that I was into the business. And he was like, yo, my group Five Elements needs a manager. So it was at that point, shortly after that, that I took him up on his offer and started doing management for the last poets. I mean, for Five Elements. And that ended up setting in motion a relationship with him, and not knowing at the time, what his trajectory was going to be. So eventually, D12 starts popping, and Eminem blows up, and all those things happen. But through that relationship, I traveled the country with him. I traveled the world with him eventually, and it ended up getting my feet wet very much in the hip hop industry. So that's one parallel. But also the other parallel too was I started collecting memorabilia, and one of those professors out of the three black professors I had at Ferris State, his name is Dr. David Pilgrim, who started a museum that's called the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. And so through his class, through his intro to sociology class, I started collecting memorabilia because every week he would bring in a different artifact that was Jim Crow related and had us interpret that, give us context, have us do research, have us have discussions about these stereotypes and the origins of anti-Blackness stereotypes in America. So it was his class that I really got that insight and that desire to collect that type of memorabilia initially, but eventually started collecting material that just reflects the whole Black experience. Because you can imagine me stepping into his classroom, I was very much informed by what I was hearing in hip hop music. So I was able to put tangible representations of that information that Public Enemy was talking about. You know what I'm saying? So it was easy for me to make those connections, and then not only to make those connections, but broaden out my perspective on that larger historical context of that history. And then to use artifacts to tell those stories was just a powerful way of doing it. So getting back to that flyer that Proof gave me that night, that flyer that he gave me that night was a flyer of 5 elements doing a performance at the Magic Bag. And it was years later that I looked at that flyer again and noticed who the opening act was that night. So if you take a look at this flyer, the opening act of that night was Eminem.
Wow.
Yeah. So and it's funny because the Detroit News just did an article about the museum a couple days ago, and they have a large picture of that flyer. But so collecting artifacts and using artifacts to engage people and having discussions about our history is just a very powerful way to engage people. And so as a teacher in the Detroit Public Schools, I found myself doing that quite a bit with my students. And so that's where the initial idea came from. And then 1995 happens. 1995, Minister Farrakhan calls 1 million Black men to Washington, D.C.
I was there, brother.
Yeah, under the themes of atonement, reconciliation, and responsibility. And at that time, I didn't know what to expect, but I knew when I heard that call. And I remember, were we at Cobo Hall when 10,000 of us went down there to see Minister Farrakhan? Was that Cobo?
There.
Yeah. So that was that initial call that he made to the brothers in Detroit. And I knew I had to be there. You know what I'm saying? As a Black man, I knew that there was something going down, and Minister Farrakhan was calling us to stand up. And I was like, yo, I'm going to be amongst those million. And I think Detroit had the largest delegation. I think we had, was it 60,000?
Yeah, I don't know those numbers, but I remember the Million Man March like it was yesterday. I remember the road trip, getting there, bumping into brothers at the rest stops in Ohio, and on the turnpike, on the freeway. Every time we stopped to get some food or to use the bathroom, we would just see brothers and we would just lock eyes and just hug. I mean, it was just weird. Strangers. We knew that we were all on the same path. It was, Spike tried to do it just with get on the bus. We lived it. It was, Anyway, so, I could go on forever. Go ahead.
So that experience in particular was a huge turning point in my life, in my development. Prior to the Million Man March, those things I had been collecting at that point, I probably from 1991 up until 95, I probably collected maybe 300 or 400 artifacts. And it was just a private collection at that time. It was just things I just had and shared with friends and family. When I left the Million Man March, and Minister Farrakhan told us to go get involved in the community and join an organization, I came right back home. I connected with Minister Malik Shabazz of the New Marcus Garvey movement.
Yes, sir.
I connected with him because at the time he was the most visual representation of a brother who was out in the community, unapologetically doing work for the people and standing up for us. And he had weekly meetings every Friday night, I believe, or Thursday night over on Mack Avenue, and I forgot the cross street. But it was through my experience with him that I met, Dr. Barashango, Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Khalid, and many more of the people that you were meeting back in Morehouse. I was starting to meet them then because of what he was doing and the people that he was inviting to these weekly meetings. And so my level of consciousness just raised even more at that point. And so it was through those meetings that I first approached him about doing small exhibits at his meetings. So I remember asking him if I could if I could set up a couple of exhibit tables, and he encouraged me to do. He said, of course, definitely do that. Come on down. So I set up a couple tables, and man, people were just blown away by the material that I had on display. And I didn't know how people were going to respond to it, but I mean, it was a very, very positive response, and people started to take notice of the work at that point. And I started to get people saying that the work that I was doing reminded them of what Dr. Charles Wright was doing.
Right.
And then that reminded me, it had me reflect upon my first experience of going to Dr. Wright's museum. And so you'll remember when we were at Verner, taking field trips to West Grand Boulevard to his very first museum, which was just row houses.
Yep.
And I remember walking into that museum and seeing, that Garrett Morgan gas mask on display. I was one of the first things before.
Yep.
And so that, it wasn't until I started doing that work of doing exhibits that I started to reflect upon, like, where was this coming from for me? Like, what was in me already that was trying to come out? And then I remember, my first experience with Black museums was in elementary school. And I met Dr. Charles Wright. And, you have these experiences, and sometimes you forget that seeds had been planted. And, when those seeds are planted, it just takes the right environment, cultivation, and that water and nutrients to be poured on you for that growth to come up. And so, I would have to say the Million Man March was one of those environments that tapped into me, something that had been planted years ago. And not knowing that Allah had put me on this path that I would gradually go through this process and things would evolve in my life, and that eventually it would put me on this road, right? So it's been, the work has been amazing. So in terms of museum, it grew from that experience with Malik Shabazz. It grew from that. I started to get invites to go to college campuses, and it just, once it got on the college campuses, it just kind of took on a life of its own. And because I was doing booking with hip hop artists and last poets and such, I already had that skill set in terms of booking. So for me to tap into that market was not a hard thing for me to do. I was very comfortable in that space. So that, so I think that's one of the ways and one of the reasons why it took off so quickly, is because I was familiar in that space already.
So couple quick points, and I want you to kind of get ready to share the what the museum has come to now.
Right.
But while you're getting that set up to share, couple points. Dr. Charles Wright, he was the doctor part of that was OBGYN. He delivered me into this world.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And and the Million Man March, that was the impetus for me when I graduated from Morehouse, and I went to grad school and got a master's in engineering, and I ended up going into the management consulting world. So I was traveling and making some decent money and doing things, but the Million Man March kind of got me right back and say, hey, you got to do something in the community. And that's when, like what you did with brother Malik Shabazz, I ended up going back to my church at Hertford because they had a rites of passage program in Africa. And so I was just like, that right there, that's what I need. That's what I want to do. And so that's when I started going to Africa every year and taking young boys from Detroit to Africa to visit Goree Island, to visit Jufuray, where Alex Haley traces ancestry back, and to go through a traditional African rites of passage ritual with a village in the Gambia, a Muslim village in the Gambia that still practice traditional rites of passage. So we had boys from Detroit, 13-year-old boys from Detroit, with boys from the village in the Gambia who are of the age for rites of passage going into the bush together.
That's
I mean,
amazing.
just, and that's the beauty. Million Man March just called us out and said,
Yeah,
bruh, you
yeah.
need to do something.
And that's a story that's a story that has not been fully told. The impact of the Million Man March. Um, there were tens of thousands of black men who registered to vote after the Million Man March. There was a young senator by the name of Barack Obama who was in that crowd,
Mm-hmm.
and he was impacted on it, by the Million Man March, and it was almost a setup over time because we were prepped for someone like a Barack Obama to come into politics the way he did, and for us to respond the way we responded to him because of the Million Man March. And that's a part of that's my opinion, but I think that we were prepped for that as well. But though there's stories that have not been told in terms of the impact of the Million Man March that needs to be told, and I mean it's going to have to be told by us. But I meet so many people around the country who started businesses because of the Million Man March. Yeah, man. So yeah, that was huge for me. But so the museum ended up growing as a result of the Million Man March. I started collecting even more. The museum has over the years now has acquired over 10,000 artifacts.
Wow.
Some of the artifacts that I've been able to acquire are museum quality pieces. Some of them are rare documents. I have documents that are signed by Malcolm and Martin and Kwame Ture, Rosa Parks, James Brown, David Ruffin, Maya Angelou, Marcus Garvey, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Dr. Charles Wright. I mean, Mayor Young, John Conyers, Berry Gordy, Michael Jackson, Chuck D. I mean, you name it. I mean, I've been collecting 30 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and so my mission with collecting was to acquire things that celebrated and reflected the diverse experience of Black people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, and then tie us into the greater global community as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so the museum has been able to now travel to 40 states. I've been to well over 500 institutions. It's K through 12 schools, colleges, religious institutions, churches, mosques, synagogues, um, cultural centers, museums, government agencies, all types of spaces, very diverse spaces with diverse groups of people, and and people have responded in very profound ways and impactful ways. And I get called all over the country to do the work, man, and it's needed now more than ever. It's needed now more than ever. So it's been a blessing to do the work. I know spiritually it's been what I've come to understand is what I've been born to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm just getting started in the work as well. When I think back, that this has been a 30-year work, It seems like it just started yesterday. You know what I'm saying? And that's the beauty of it.
One
Um,
thing I'm really proud of you, in addition to the museum, but also when you shared with me where you actually, because number one, I thought it was just beautiful that you became a teacher. Number one, because having a black male teacher means everything in Detroit. So the fact that you went into education was a beautiful thing. Uh, but then when you really took the museum to the next level, and you ended up making it your full-time thing,
right,
you decided to also say, hey, well, I'm gonna make this investment. I'm also gonna go and get a PhD.
right.
Okay. And at the same time. And so, I want you to show us your museum or what it's grown into, but I also want you to talk a little bit about your decision to just really go all out
Yeah,
and do it full time and get the PhD as well. So
right. I think my grounding in hip hop culture gave me the confidence and the vision to to do for self, and those concepts and that confidence coming from hip hop culture also is very much aligned with the teachings of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad,
yes, sir.
who said, do for
Black
self,
man, do for self.
or suffer the consequences. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, um, yeah. So I spent my time in DPS. I enjoyed my time in
Detroit
DPS,
Public Schools, for people
Detroit
don't know
Public Schools. Thank
DPS.
you. And I love the experience, and I love my students. The politics of the Detroit Public Schools at the time, I was getting ready to make my transition, and this was one of the triggers. Is we were at a point in time where we were the school district had been taken over by the state, and we were being controlled by um, what they call the emergency manager,
Mm-hmm.
who did not have the best interests of our students and our educators at hand. So one of the impacts it had not only on our students but directly on the teachers was, for one, we had a huge pay cut, which took us back almost 5 years in terms of pay, which was, I mean, that was devastating on one end. But more devastating though was at the end of every school year for the last 4 years that I was a teacher, we were getting pink slips. So we didn't know whether or not we were going to be rehired the next school year. And so a teacher has to go through a process where they have to take professional development credits. They have to, maintain their certification, and then they had to get the status that made them quote unquote highly qualified, which I had gotten at that point. And I had just I had just become a tenured teacher. I had my 10 years. Um, that was 2007. I got my 10 years, which put me at a different pay scale too. It was like a boost of $10,000. But because we were under this situation with this emergency manager, I got that raise, and then the next year they dropped that raise down again. I'm like, they're killing me right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then I got pink slips, and I had just turned 40, I had just got married, and I was like, man, I got to do something. And the visibility of the museum had gotten to the point where I started having thoughts of, well, if I make so much money in a month, if I can get that same amount of money within a day with this museum going on a college campus or going into a corporation, all I have to do is be able to repeat that, 12 times in a year. And I'm putting in 50 hours a week. I'm putting in 50 hours a week teaching. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, what if I do for self? What if I put 50 hours a week into myself, right? Put 50 hours a week into myself. So once I started thinking on that level, I was like, all right, I think I can do it. I think I could do it. So I had just turned 40 and I told myself, I'm going to give myself 10 years to do this museum, go all out full time, and I'm going to see where this leads me. And I told myself, if all else fails, I can come back into the classroom and teach because I'm a teacher. I love doing it. And I'll get a master's degree. At least I'm coming back, over this period with a master's degree. I wasn't even thinking PhD at the time. And so I set off on this mission. Now, in terms of spirit, I want to make a connection to the spiritual aspect of this. One of the hardest things for me to do at the time was to give my resignation letter to the Detroit Public Schools. I was nervous, man. I didn't know. I thought I was losing my mind because I'm so used to getting this paycheck every couple of weeks, having benefits, and then the adults in my life, my elders, who, if you're, at the time, if you're an elder and you're looking at me, you're thinking, oh, you're a teacher. Oh, you went to college. You're a teacher. That's a great profession. I'm so proud of you. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, people are proud of you because you're in this position. And teaching is a noble profession. I get it. But those individuals are like, they're coming from, and especially in Detroit, these are auto workers coming from an auto worker's perspective. Like, you go into a job and you're there for 30 years, you retire, and that's a great life. You know what I'm saying? And it really is. And I still believe that in that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got people who are still teaching that I used to teach with. And I mean, I appreciate them and love them. But my elders was like, you're going to do what? You're going to leave your job to do, huh? And they didn't get it. But there was something in me telling me that this is something that I must do. So I took that leap of faith. Walking out the door, I see a brother who, right after the Million Man March, I said Malik Shabazz was one person I went to connect with. The other brother I went to connect with, he's an educator, all right, PhD, Dr. Ray Johnson.
Oh, that's my neighbor, man. We grew up on Stansbury.
Okay.
Ray lived literally 5 doors down from me.
Wow. Well, that brother there, when I came back from the Million Man March, he was over at the Paul Robeson Academy.
Yep. Yes, sir.
And he was inviting Black men to come in and mentor and connect with the students. Initially, just coming in during lunchtime and just volunteering. So I took him up on that offer and I started doing that with him. But eventually, I ended up running into him at a professional development for Detroit Public School teachers. Mm-hmm. And I sat through one of his workshops, and he had this workshop called on time, on task, and on a mission. Brother, he inspired me. That's at that time.
Dude, right there.
Yeah, man. Yes, sir. Inspired me at that time. So dig this. I'm walking out of the Detroit Public School office, just like shook because I don't know what I just did. You know what I'm saying? As I'm walking out, Ray Johnson's walking in. Mm-hmm. And I stopped him and I'm like, brother, this is what I just did. Man, he gave me some words of encouragement. He was like, brother, you are doing the right thing. And he was like, stay in touch with me. Man, that brother, he just in those few minutes that we talked, man, he let me know that I did the right thing. And I don't think I talked to him again until I got accepted into my PhD program. And I called him up and he was so proud, man. And when I graduated, I called him again and told him I graduated. And, and we've been talking recently. But yeah, man. So at that point, man, I started that mission on doing the museum full time. And I can honestly say, bro, once I started that mission, I did not look back to what I might have lost. I mean, it opened up a whole new world for me, brother. And I have not wanted for anything since. Have not wanted for anything since. And I've been able to use this platform to not only impact the people that I engage on a daily basis with the museum and doing this exhibit experience, but the brothers and sisters who have supported me in this work. So obviously, Professor
I mean,
Griff.
can you name some of, because you know you're gonna drop Professor Griff like it ain't nothing, but just can you just tell us some of the people that you deal with, man?
Absolutely, man. So first and foremost, I gotta thank the brothers and sisters who initially were helping me in developing of the development of this work and this mission. So and two of them were Fair State friends and colleagues. So one was Keely Lackey, who was my sister at Fair State. She, when I started my first company, New Rising Sun Entertainment, she was right there with me as a partner. When she graduated from Ferris, I brought her into the Detroit Job Corps. So she was right there with me when I first started the museum, first did the first exhibits. And then Omari Barksdale, who was a Ferris State partner of mine, who also has, he was an incredibly talented poet. And so when I started managing poets early on, a group called Third Eye Open Poetry Collective was formed. And
Yep.
so they were a group of poets that I actually started booking shows for around the city and then eventually around the country. But Omari was a part of that group as well. But Omari eventually ended up working with me with the museum. And so as I traveled around the country, Omari and then Dumini DePores, who was a part of a group called Enemy Squad, whose leader of Enemy Squad was a partner of mine from Bobian and Mumford, Gabe Gonzalez, who while we were at Bobian, he was traveling with George Clinton in the P-Funk All-Stars as a drummer.
Oh wow.
So you know the roots, the roots go real deep. But Dumini DePores now has been traveling with the museum for about 17 years. But so those two brothers, but Jessica Care Moore has been a big supporter of mine for many years, and she's traveled with the museum.
Yep.
Fred Hampton Jr. has come out on some dates. Ernie Panicoli, the hip hop photographer, obviously the Last Poets, Paradise Gray from X Clan, Brother Jay has made a stop at the museum. Chuck D has made a stop in the museum. KRS-One has walked through the museum. Minister Farrakhan has looked at some of the artifacts in the museum in a private meeting that we've had. I've walked Mother Tynetta through the museum.
Wow.
But one of the biggest supporters and most consistent supporters over the years has been Professor Griff, who I met in the early 2000s when I had Third Eye open up for him for a lecture in Detroit. And it was at the Shrine of the Black Madonna. And from that point onward, Griff has just been one of those stable, consistent supporters, and and he's come out to the museum, hundreds of times now. As a matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, and just to give people a sense of how the museum has grown, obviously I can't do all the work myself at this time, so I get multiple dates. So I've given Griff one of the exhibits to take out on the road. So just a couple of days ago, he was up in Billings, Montana, at a school at Rocky Mountain College at a date that I could not make. And he went up there and did a phenomenal job, man, with the museum, and and did the work, brother. And yeah, he's been incredible. You know what I'm saying? And he's been one of my most trusted allies in this work, comrades in this work. And it's a reminder of the work being a lot larger than me too. And
Absolutely, and that's the thing that I am just so proud of you.
Yeah, the spiritual aspect of it is deep. So
so can you show us this museum, man? Can you show us? Give us a little bit of a tour as we kind of close this out.
Absolutely, man. So after 30 years, this is been one of the huge milestones of the work. I was invited to have the museum come up to the Marshall Fredericks Sculpture Museum on the campus of Saginaw Valley State University, and I sent up 170 artifacts of memorabilia, and they laid out this material in a 360 degree virtual space that I want to share with you all. And so the layout here is separated into several different sections. There's the pioneer section, there's a Detroit section, there's a women's section, an icon section, press photographs, and artwork. So this is where you walk into the pioneers.
Mm-hmm.
And so our, as Detroiters, our first experience with hip hop came via this single here from Sugar Hill Records, Rapper's Delight.
Yep.
This is 1979, 1980. And it was the sister, Sylvia Robinson, who's on the cover of Jet magazine right here in the 50s, if I get around to this.
Yep.
Well,
yep.
So I'm just gonna walk.
Yeah.
So this is the Detroit section, and here we have Jay Dilla.
Jay Dilla.
We got Slum Village here on the wall with my brother Batin, who was a very, very close friend of mine. T3 and Elzai here. Early on in Detroit history, Detroiters will recognize Smiley, who's, I would say she's the, pioneering female MC in Detroit. She probably was one of the most popular female MCs early on. And we got Boss right here, and this is Batin, one of his albums that Black Milk produced. And these three pieces here, this one here, this piece right here, and this here, these are the obituaries of Batin, Proof right here, and Jay Dilla. And I wanted to display them to give people a sense of the tragic experience of Detroit hip hop in one respect, but also the incredible contributions that these brothers made in their short lives. So this section is dedicated to them. This is Proof's Kango here. He was known for wearing Kangos. You might recognize this book here. This is Jessica Care Moore's very first book, The Words Don't Fit in My Mouth. And that's a book as a middle school teacher when I taught at Nolan back in 96, 97. I was teaching her work in my class, in my social studies class. So the idea of teaching hip hop in schools is, now they call it hip hop pedagogy. This is something that I was doing way back in the 90s, in the mid 90s. So
wow.
This is Awesome Dre and the Hardcore Committee. This is one of his original press photos. Then Eminem and JLB, Eminem and Royce. So again, 170 original artifacts. This is the women's section here. My sister Shah Rock, who's a big supporter. I didn't mention her, but she also travels quite a bit with the museum. She's been a big supporter. And to have someone like Shah Rock helping me out with this work has been a huge blessing as well. Then we have the hip hop movie posters on display. Then hip hop action figures. You got Tupac right here and Snoop Dogg. This is I mentioned Ernie Panicoli earlier, who's documented hip hop more than any other photographer in hip hop history. But that's one of the shots of Paris there. Call this the icon section. We got MC Hammer front and center, just because I consider him to be hip hop's first major icon, and I say that just based upon the artifacts that were produced that
Yeah.
reflect his contribution. You know, so you got him with his own Viewmaster, MC Hammer lunchbox, action figure, him on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, MC Hammer comic book, and that's just a few of the things
Yep.
that reflects his contribution. But then you got icons. One of the early favorites for me was LL Cool J.
LL.
And then you have these two gentlemen right here, Kanye West and Jay-Z. And you can imagine, going back to the early 80s when people thought that this was just a fad, those early artists could never imagine that hip hop would make billionaires, 2 billionaires. And well, I have to say that, hip hop made billionaires prior to Kanye and Jay-Z, but they just weren't black. So, hip hop has been making billionaires for quite a few years. But in terms of hip hop artists becoming, billionaires, these two gentlemen here were the first billionaires in hip hop. So, just
Yeah, and Dr. Dre just really, really took it to another level too.
oh, absolutely,
Financially.
absolutely. So these are some of the groups: NWA, Public Enemy, DMC, Run DMC, Houdini.
Mm-hmm.
And then this section right here are some of the hip hop press photos, which are obsolete now because of technology. But these are the things that were sent out from the record labels to newspapers and magazines and all around the country. These are some of Ernie Panicoli's photographs that are rare. We see brother Khalid Muhammad down here with
Yes,
Ice Cube.
sir.
See a young Jay-Z, young Kanye, Tribe Called Quest, young Outkast. Yeah, that's a great picture of them cats. Andre 3000.
Yeah.
Love that.
That
And
is-
yeah, man, just so it's just a walk through hip hop history, and it's beautiful to see it within this space because sometimes, well, historically, museums have not been inclusive of our history.
yeah.
Although museums have encouraged the public to come in and visit. If you're a person of color, sometimes we walk into these spaces and they don't resonate with us because we don't see ourselves represented.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the challenges that mainstream museums have been given is to be more inclusive to marginalized voices and perspectives. So I congratulate and acknowledge the Marshall Frederick Museum for this invitation. And this wasn't the first time doing something that's been this progressive, but I'm very honored that I'm a part of their efforts to make our history and our contributions more accessible to the public, to their audience. So yeah, so this is just just a little taste of what's in the exhibit right now.
Yeah. So I mean, I gotta so as we close this out, I just want to let you know this. I just remember when you showed this to me and I could see the pride on your face, man. And I absolutely am so proud of you and what this has become. And quite frankly, I'm very, very encouraged as to what this is going to grow into because I can tell you ain't done. You know what I mean? And this is gonna even grow beyond what it currently is. And I just want to just acknowledge, brother, I am just so proud of you. I'm glad to know you, and I can't wait to see, what this ends up turning into.
Well, brother, I'm proud of you, and I think a lot for you, and I know that Allah has been in control of us coming back around and reconnecting. There's no question about that. So with that being said, we're doing the work that we're supposed to be doing.
Supposed to be.
when
This ain't
we
optional.
yeah, it's not optional. When you've been given the opportunities and the experiences that you and I have been given, and for the people who have listened to this talk, we've been given so much. So it's only natural we would be doing the things that we're doing. Not only is it required of us, but it's also natural. You know what I'm saying? It's natural when you cultivate the human mind as such as we've been cultivated and exposed to the things that we've been exposed to. Our destination is nothing but human excellence.
Nothing less than
Absolutely,
excellence.
absolutely. So it's nothing exceptional. It's natural. You know what I'm saying? So we're doing the work that we're doing, um, and it seems, in many cases at this point it seems easy. It seems like I'm doing it. I mean, I'm having fun doing it. I'm not stressed about doing it. And it's the least that we can do because of the sacrifices that people have made prior to this. If all I have to do is share artifacts and tell stories of what Malcolm and Martin and Huey P. Newton and Angela Davis and Sojourner Truth and so on and so forth have done for us, if I'm just telling the stories and reminding people, that's a blessing. And
That's a
not to
blessing.
say, yeah, and not to say that it has not come without controversy and without doors being shut and without backbiters and haters. I mean, you're going to have that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that just comes with the territory.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, we know what those did before us. So we're tasked with picking up, the struggle where they left off. So that's what we're tasked to do.
Well, brother, we're gonna have to leave it there. I got another thing to go to, man. But I just want to express again, I'm super proud of you, and our paths are definitely connected and will be forever. And thank you for sharing that the museum and what it's come to with us. And brother, we will be in touch soon, man.
Sounds good, brother.
All
Thank you,
right,
man.
Dr. Khalid, I appreciate you. I love you, my brother, and thanks again for sharing with us.
Much respect. Peace.
All right, peace.